I never thought a simple glance across the snow-covered base of a mountain would lead to me straddling a snowboard with someone's hand under my jacket while the ski lift swung gently in the wind. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even something I thought I wanted. But when our eyes met for the first time that morning, everything else around me went quiet, like the mountain, the chatter, the cold air, and even my thoughts faded until all I could see was him. It was my second day at Frost River. I'd booked the solo trip on a whim after the guy I was supposed to go with backed out 2 days before our flight. I was already packed, already overdue for a break, and tired of waiting for someone to choose me with both feet. So I went alone, telling myself I'd enjoy the views, hit the trails, and maybe sit by the fire with a whiskey and a book. What I hadn't expected was to find someone else doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, as if the universe was nudging us toward each other with a gloved hand and a shared chairlift ticket. He was standing by the rental counter at the base of the beginner slope when I saw him, tall, lean, with strong shoulders under a dark green parka and a beanie pulled low over dark hair that curled just a little over his ears. He looked confident but not arrogant. Comfortable, like he belonged here. Our eyes met for less than a second before I looked away, trying not to be obvious, but then I looked back, and he was still looking. He smiled. Not a wide grin, not anything forced. Just a soft, curious smile that made my chest tighten and my breath hang heavier in the air. I nodded almost without thinking. He stepped forward. "You riding solo?" he asked, voice warm, eyes squinting slightly against the snow light. "Yeah," I said, gesturing toward my board. "Friend bailed. Figured I'd come anyway." "Same here," he replied, offering a gloved hand. "I'm Logan." "Evan," I said, taking his hand and feeling that tiny buzz even through her gloves. There was no awkwardness. No hesitation. Just two men who didn't need small talk to know something unspoken had already passed between them. A thread had been tied, and neither of us seemed interested in cutting it. "You want to ride up together?" he asked, jerking his head toward the ski lift. I nodded. "Sure. Let's get lost a little." We strapped in and made our way to the chairlift, the boards crunching gently on fresh powder, the air crisp and clean in our lungs. The lift wasn't busy, it was early still, and the crowds were probably warming up on the beginner slopes or sipping hot drinks in the lodge. When we sat side by side and the bar came down in front of us, I felt his thigh brush mine, and I didn't move. As the chair rose and the mountain opened up below us, we talked. At first it was easy stuff, where we were from, how long we'd been boarding, what brought us here alone. But then it shifted. We started laughing about how snowboarding was like dating, one wrong turn and you're flat on your back, staring up at a cold sky and wondering how the hell you got there. He told me he'd just gotten out of something complicated. I admitted I'd never been in anything long enough to call it complicated. There was something in the way he looked at me, like I wasn't just a person next to him on a lift, but someone he was actually seeing. Really seeing. When we got off at the top, we didn't rush down. We lingered, looking out over the trees and the tiny specks of people below. Then he leaned slightly toward me, his voice low under his breath. "You want to ditch the map?" I smiled. "Always." We pushed off, carving into the slope together, two strangers who weren't really strangers anymore. The snow was soft and untouched in places, the kind of powder you only find when you go off trail, which is exactly what we did. Logan veered off first, cutting left through a small cluster of trees, glancing back just once to make sure I followed. I did, without question. There was no real path, just instinct and snow beneath our boards, the air sharp in our lungs, and that strange comfort of knowing someone was only a few feet away in every direction, matching your pace, matching your energy. We didn't talk much as we rode. The mountain didn't need conversation. It gave us enough to focus on, the balance, the rhythm, the way the trees seemed to open just for us. We carved down curves together, taking turns leading and trailing, each movement smooth and reactive, like a kind of dance. It didn't matter that we barely knew each other. Our bodies knew enough. When we finally came to a stop in a quiet clearing, the world felt hushed around us. Snow clung to our hoods, our lashes, the folds in our jackets. My breath came in small clouds, and his did too. Logan unstrapped his board and leaned back against a tree, pulling his beanie off and running a hand through his damp hair. "That was incredible," I said, shaking snow from my sleeves. He grinned, cheeks flushed from the cold and exertion. "I usually don't do this with strangers. Ride? Go off trail. Take risks. Let my guard down." I walked over and stood next to him, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. "You don't feel like a stranger." He turned toward me, his breath slower now. "Neither do you." The space between us shrank without either of us moving. It just disappeared. I looked at his lips, pink from the cold, slightly parted like they were waiting. I could feel my heart thudding beneath all the layers I was wearing. I wasn't sure if I was going to kiss him. I wasn't sure if he wanted me to. But I didn't step away. And then he said quietly, "We've got time for one more run." We strapped back in, but this time we took it slower. Less about speed, more about proximity. He would glance over at me mid-turn and smile like he was letting me in on a secret. I followed him down, closer now, our boards throwing snow against each other's legs as we drifted together. At the bottom of the slope, instead of heading toward the lodge, we glided into the lift line again. It was quieter now, nearly empty. The wind had picked up slightly and the clouds had begun to gather, but neither of us cared. We sat on the lift again, side by side, but this time his knee pressed into mine with more certainty. He turned his head toward me and said, "That trail wasn't on the map, was it?" I smirked. "Guess we got a little lost." He smiled but didn't say anything else right away. The lift groaned softly as it pulled us higher, the snow beneath us turning paler, the trees thinner and quieter. I looked around. The chairs behind us were empty. The one in front too. For a few minutes, it felt like we were completely alone, just us, suspended in a slow climb toward nowhere in particular. "I like this," he said finally, voice low, nearly a whisper. "Being here. With you." "Me too," I replied, feeling his thigh against mine, his arm close, the heat of his body fighting the cold air around us. He looked at me then, not fast, not awkward, but full and steady, like he was making a choice. His hand moved, hesitated, then landed softly on my thigh. "You cold?" he asked, half grinning. I shook my head. Not even a little. We both laughed quietly, and then we didn't say anything else for a while. The lift carried us up, slow and smooth, and by the time we reached the halfway point, we'd stopped pretending there was space between us at all. The wind grew stronger as the lift climbed higher, but inside the small plexiglass enclosure of the gondola cabin, everything felt still, contained, almost too quiet. Logan shifted in his seat beside me, pulling his gloves off slowly, stuffing them into his jacket pocket like he had nowhere else to be. His thigh pressed into mine with no apology now, just presence, just warmth, and when I looked down, I saw his fingers resting gently on the fabric of my snow pants, just above my knee. He didn't speak, and neither did I. We didn't need to. The tension between us was full, alive, built on everything we hadn't said but had felt in every glance, every carved turn, every brush of shoulders as we strapped into our boards. The cabin rocked slightly, swaying as we passed one of the poles, and in that soft moment of movement, he turned toward me. His hand slid slowly up my thigh, cautious but deliberate, his eyes flicking to mine to make sure I wasn't going to stop him. I didn't. I leaned in instead, my breath catching as the cold air outside hissed through a small vent and rushed past our flushed faces. When our lips finally met, it didn't feel like a first kiss. It felt like a continuation, like something we'd already started, earlier in the trees, earlier in the way he'd looked at me before we even spoke. His mouth was warm and certain, tasting faintly of mint gum and mountain air. His gloved hand slid behind my neck, pulling me in closer, deepening the kiss, and I felt my fingers clench around the seat beneath us just to keep myself from floating up with the lift. The kiss didn't break. It only slowed, shifted, his lips moving against mine, exploring carefully but thoroughly. His hand slid under my jacket, across the thermal fabric of my base layer, finding the heat trapped underneath. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the closeness, the way he touched me like he already knew where I wanted him. "I can't believe we're doing this," he whispered against my mouth, laughing softly. "I can," I whispered back, smiling as I kissed the corner of his mouth. It was bound to happen. He kissed me again, harder this time, his hand sliding under the back of my shirt, warm against my lower back. I let out a soft sound, barely audible over the wind outside, and leaned into him fully. Our bodies pressed together awkwardly in the heavy gear, but neither of us cared. My fingers traced his jaw, then ran down to his chest, feeling the fast rhythm of his heart under his jacket. The gondola kept moving, but time didn't. We stayed like that, kissing, touching, breathing each other in for what felt like forever, but was probably just a few minutes. He slid his hand up my back, over my shoulder blades, pulling me closer until our foreheads touched. His eyes were closed. Mine, too. The world had narrowed to heat and skin and breath in a box swinging above the trees. Then, slowly, the lift began to slow. We were approaching the top. He kissed me one more time, soft and lingering, and then pulled back just enough to look into my eyes. "I've never done that before," he said quietly. "Me neither," I answered, my voice low. "Not here. Not like that." We both laughed, nervous, breathless, alive. As the lift doors opened, we adjusted our gear in silence, but our eyes didn't stop meeting. The kiss had changed something. The trail was still snow-covered. The sky still wide. But we were no longer two guys alone on a mountain. We were something else now. Something that had crossed the line between maybe and yes. And the day wasn't even over yet. The doors of the gondola slid open with a slow mechanical groan, and the cold mountain air rushed back into our space like it had been waiting for a chance to remind us where we were. Logan stepped out first, his board tucked under his arm, and turned to look at me with a smirk that barely hid the fire still behind his eyes. I followed, still a little dazed, my lips tingling from where his mouth had moved over mine. We didn't speak at first. Just strapped in side by side, the crunch of our bindings clicking into place, the only sound between us. A few skiers passed nearby, but the top was still quiet, clouds settling just above the trees and the occasional swoosh of a jacket flapping in the wind. I glanced over at him and caught him staring at me again. This time, he didn't look away. "You good?" he asked, but his voice was different now, lower, less casual, more intimate. I nodded, adjusting my gloves. "Better than good." "Me too." We pushed off slowly, gliding down the mountain, but not toward the main trail. Logan led us down a smaller path that curved off to the side, unmarked and narrow, winding between the tall pines. I followed without hesitation. The snow here was untouched, powdery and soft, and the trees blocked most of the wind. The silence wrapped around us again, not awkward but private, like the world was politely giving us space. We stopped in a flat, open clearing about halfway down. He turned to face me, pulling off his gloves and letting them hang from the loops on his wrists. His cheeks were pink from the cold and the ride, his eyes a little glassy from the brightness of the sky above, but there was something else there too, calm, curiosity, something like trust. "I don't do this," he said, stepping closer, his board buried halfway in the snow behind him. "Me either," I replied honestly. "But I don't want to stop either." He reached out and touched my face, bare fingers against my cheek, rough and warm. I leaned into it instinctively. He smiled. "We've got a whole mountain," he said softly. "But I'd rather stand right here with you." My hands slid under his jacket again, and I felt the firm heat of his back through his thermals. He pulled me close, our boards creating a wide stance as we pressed against each other and kissed again, slower this time, less rushed. The kind of kiss that says, "I know we don't have forever, but we have this moment, and I want to feel all of it." I reached up and pushed his beanie back just a little, revealing more of his messy hair. He laughed against my mouth, and I smiled back, our foreheads pressing together. "You always kiss like that?" I asked. "Only when it matters," he said, breathless. We kissed again, and this time our hands roamed with more purpose. My fingers slipped beneath the hem of his shirt, touching bare skin, warm and tense under my palms. He groaned softly, his mouth moving to my neck, lips grazing my jaw as his hands slid under my jacket to hold my waist. It was cold outside, but our bodies felt like fire. The contrast made it more intense, more real. After a long moment, we slowed. His arms stayed around me, our bodies still pressed close, noses brushing in the cold. "Come back with me," he whispered. "After the run." I looked at him, heart pounding. "Yeah, I want that." He kissed me again. Quick, firm. We rode the rest of the way down without talking, side by side the whole time, our boards carving fresh lines into untouched snow. Every few seconds, I'd glance over and see his smile, and every time, it made something deep in me settle. When we finally reached the bottom, we didn't unstrap right away. We just stood there, catching our breath, staring back up at the path we'd come down. Then he reached for my hand. And just like that, we walked together toward the lodge, towards something neither of us had expected but neither of us wanted to end. The warmth of the lodge hit us the second we stepped inside, a blast of dry, fire-heated air that made the sweat under our layers start to cool against our skin. I unzipped my jacket, shaking snow from the collar, while Logan brushed off his shoulders and ran a hand through his hair, leaving it messier than before, but in a way that only made me want to run my fingers through it too. We stood near the front entrance for a moment, letting the fog on our goggles clear, and I felt the weight of the moment settle in. The buzz of other skiers, the clinking of mugs behind the cafe counter, the muffled sounds of boots against tile, it all faded when Logan turned and gave me a look that felt like a quiet invitation. "My room's just upstairs," he said, voice soft and low. "It's got a view of the slope." "A view, huh?" I asked, raising a brow. "Among other things," he said, and then he smiled, a little nervously but without backing down. I didn't need convincing. We made our way through the hall, boards slung under our arms, brushing shoulders, our gloves still hanging from our wrists. The hallway was narrow and warmly lit, lined with ski jackets on wall hooks and damp boots by the doors. His room was near the end, facing the mountain, and when he opened the door, I could smell cedar, clean laundry, and a faint hint of his cologne lingering in the air. It wasn't fancy, just a big bed with a plaid comforter, a fireplace flickering in the corner, and a small balcony with a frosted glass door that looked out over the snow-covered trees. Logan set his board down, then turned back toward me. Neither of us said anything at first. There wasn't a script for this. No lines to follow. Just us, standing there in the quiet hum of a heated room with the memory of that gondola still burning against our lips. He stepped forward and unzipped my jacket slowly, his fingers brushing my chest as he peeled it back, one layer at a time. I let my arms fall loose, letting it drop to the floor. I reached for him next, tugging gently on his coat, unfastening each strap and zipper until he stood in front of me in just his base layers, black, fitted, and clinging to the shape of his body like a second skin. He moved in close, our foreheads resting against each other's as his hands slid under the back of my shirt, pressing against my bare skin again. It was warm here, but the heat between us had nothing to do with the fireplace. He kissed me deeply, slowly, then again, softer, like he was trying to memorize the shape of my mouth. I haven't done this in a long time, he said quietly between kisses, his fingers resting on my waist. At least not where it meant something. I pulled him closer, my hands on his lower back, feeling his breath catch. Then let's make it mean something. We undressed each other slowly, like we had all the time in the world. Every inch of skin revealed came with a kiss, a caress, a shared breath. He touched me like he wanted to learn me. I kissed his chest, his shoulders, his neck, each time feeling him lean into me more, surrendering bit by bit. When we finally lay down together, the blankets pulled up over our warm bodies, it didn't feel rushed or wild. It felt careful, intimate, real. We made love the way people do when they're done pretending they don't want more. And afterward, we stayed close. His arm was draped over my chest, our legs tangled under the sheets, our fingers lazily playing with each other's. He stared up at the wooden ceiling beams and then turned his head toward me. "You ever think maybe we weren't lost earlier?" he asked. I looked at him, smiling. "You think the mountain brought us together?" He nodded. "Or something did." I reached over, brushing his hair off his forehead, and kissed him softly again. "Then maybe next time," I said, "we should get lost again." The next morning, the light coming through the frosted glass of the balcony door was golden and soft, casting long, pale shadows across the bed. I stirred before Logan did, and for a moment I just lay there, watching his chest rise and fall with the slow rhythm of deep sleep. His arm was still wrapped around my waist, his face pressed gently into the pillow, one hand resting on my stomach like it had found its place during the night and refused to let go. I didn't want to move. Not just because of the comfort of his touch or the warmth of the bed, but because I knew mornings like this were rare. They weren't built for rushing. They were meant to be savored. Eventually, he stirred, stretching slightly, his hand tightening for a second around my side as he blinked awake. He said, voice husky. "You're still here?" "I'm not going anywhere," I said, leaning down to kiss the top of his shoulder. He turned to look at me, that lazy grin spreading across his face. "Good." We stayed in bed for a while longer, our legs tangled, our hands exploring gently, but there was no urgency now. Just connection, just presence. When we finally got up, we moved slowly, showering, pulling on warm clothes, brewing coffee in silence, not out of awkwardness, but out of a shared comfort that didn't need to be filled with words. The snow outside had softened overnight. The trees glittered, and the mountain was quieter than the day before. Logan stood at the balcony door, sipping from a mug, and glanced back at me. "Want to get one more ride in?" he asked. "Before we check out." "Definitely." We hit the slopes again, not chasing adrenaline this time, but something slower, more grounded. We stuck to easy trails, carving side by side, taking pauses to watch the wind dance over the treetops. The mountain didn't feel intimidating anymore. Felt familiar, like it had seen what happened between us and decided to hold space for it. On the last lift up, we sat close again. Not pressed together with tension this time, but with something steadier. Logan reached over and took my glove off, lacing his fingers with mine as we watched the slope stretch below us. "I wasn't looking for anyone," he said softly. "Neither was I. But I'm glad I found you." I turned and kissed him, just once gently, and he smiled when we pulled apart. Back at the base, we returned our gear and walked to the parking lot together, our bags slung over our shoulders. The cold wind picked up again, and he stepped a little closer, shielding me with his body as we laughed about how sore we were going to be in the morning. Standing beside his car, we paused. The moment felt heavy, but not sad, more like something beginning rather than ending. "You heading straight back?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "but I could make a stop." He raised a brow, smiling. "You're always welcome. My place isn't far." I nodded. "I'll text you when I'm close." Logan leaned in and kissed me one last time before sliding into his car. As I watched him drive off, I realized I wasn't just going home with aching legs and windburn. I was going home with something more. Something I hadn't expected to find on a snowy mountain. A spark that didn't burn out after the ride ended. A kiss that still tingled on my lips. And the beginning of something worth getting lost for.